Hey everyone, it's Jen Ramsey here with Freedom Unlimited. Welcome to our episode this week where we are featuring Jay Rothman from Arizona in the US. Jay, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Oh, Jay, you were just always on my list for this show. And before we start, I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of an overview of who you are and what great company we're keeping today. So Jay is a certified transformational health and wellness, addiction and corporate coach. He's active in workshops, private groups, and does coaching individually and corporately across the globe. As a leader in inspiring people to improve any aspect of their life, Jay is a motivational speaker and a retreat facilitator. He also hosts 3 web TV shows, is a 2-time #1 international author, and also a blogger. And I'm proud to say Jay is also a really great friend of mine. So I'm so happy to have you here on Freedom Unlimited and to be my very first guest on the show. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you and be a part of this new experience. Welcome to the world of broadcasting.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's been a long time coming and I'm excited to be here. So as you know, this show is all about freedom. It's about finding more freedom within ourselves so that we can feel more happier, more confident and more inspired to do those things that really matter the most to us. So Jay, I just wondered if you could give us a little bit of a backstory in terms of where you've come from and really how you came to find more freedom in your life. I'd just love to hear a bit of that story.
Sure. Well, I spent most of my adult life chasing what's called the modern American dream. From the time I got out of university, I had one focus, one goal, and that was to make a lot of money, be successful. And that was my driver. That was my motivation in my life. And in my mid-20s, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I already had achieved some great success for a young lad, as they say. And I was off to the races and running and basically spent over 3 decades defining myself by the success I had in my career. I was in corporate America, sales and marketing. Eventually, I made it to senior vice president in a corporation down in Southern California. And through the process, I met a beautiful woman. We have 3 sons together and spent close to 30 years married. And through the experience of growing up together, I lost myself. I lost myself because I had an understanding of what my role was at work and at home. And it didn't include taking time for me. It included mostly focusing on everyone else's needs, priorities. And I had this ability, I thought, to help people and always looking to lift people up. And in doing so, what happened was I myself got lost. Not that I knew who I was in my early 20s. I was already just, the roadmap was laid out for me. And I was just chasing it, knowing that no matter how much I had accumulated, no matter how much wealth I had, no matter how many cars, no matter the homes, the furniture, the clothing, the vacations. And I say clothing because as a man, I loved nice clothing. You know, I was in suit and tie most days and I enjoyed that aspect of living. However, no matter how much I had picked up along the way, inside, I was very lonely. Inside, I was not at peace. I was lacking. And by the time I woke up, I had a first major crash. I was 48 years old and I was traveling across the United States for business. And I had a heart attack. And this is back in 2008. And I thought, again, I had part of the belief system I had was, well, I just needed to change 2 things in my life, which was change my diet, quit smoking, and go to the gym and exercise. And I did that well for about 2 years until life showed up one more time and things got difficult at home. Things got difficult at the office. And I threw away what I refer to as my emotional sobriety. I went back to unhealthy food eating. I went back to smoking. I threw away everything that I had worked for. The 40 pounds I had lost, I gained the 40 plus 20 more. So by the time I woke up in 2015, I was literally in the hospital one more time, near death, except this time I had picked up more medical conditions along the way instead of having one that we were aware of. Now I had 9, and any one of those 9 should have and could have taken me out unknowingly.
That's incredible.
And so began my healing journey.
Mm. So it's kind of interesting. The healing angel knocked on your door, at 48, and you to give you the heart attack, and so you got on, as you said, you got on that sobriety wagon, but then you dropped off. What was the thing that perhaps caused you to go back to that lifestyle that wasn't supporting you?
Well, I was in emotional pain, and my marriage was going through a very difficult time, the most difficult time that we were together, and it was stressful as well at the office, and just all of it. It's kind of like an alcoholic who has what they call that F it moment, when they just say F it. I just need a drink. Mm. And for me, it was like I gravitated back to the things that I thought were providing me comfort. It was an illusion. It always is. Yeah. Comfort is an illusion. It really, the things that I was reaching for really were not providing me comfort or calm or stillness or ease. It was just providing me the illusion of it in the moment, like a instantaneous satisfaction, but it never lasted. It didn't have sustainability. And so it was just a stress. And what I hadn't learned through the process was that all disease is just a symptom. It's just there to show us that there's something way bigger going on within us. And I wasn't taught that.
That's it. They say by the time it actually gets to the physical body, it's been living in our energetic field for quite some time.
Exactly.
But we have to have that very hard knock on the door to remind us of what's going on. So what happened?
Well, when I woke up in the hospital, it's one of the leading hospitals in the world, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Beverly Hills, California. And I had close to a week as they did 2 major procedures on me. And during that time, I got to really, it's kind of like when people are facing mortality. Mm. In that moment, I had plenty of hours laying with all kinds of catheters and tubes from my neck down to my legs and down to my ankles. And I had the chance to really assess my life and assess where I was at. And I had a defining moment I like to refer to as perhaps my first spiritual awakening in my life. And that moment was, the question came to me, which was, do I want to live or do I want to die? Wow. And in that moment, I kind of had some clarity, and the clarity was, well, if I want to die, what does that look like? And the answer was very clear, crystal clear, was that just go home, recuperate from multiple surgeries, and just keep doing what you're doing. And perhaps I had less than a year to live. Wow. I didn't need a doctor to tell me that. The handwriting was on the wall. My body was in shutdown mode. Mm. But then I had the next part of that question was, well, what if I want to live? What would that look like? What would I have to be willing to do? And the answer became abundantly clear, which was I'd have to basically rebirth myself. I'd have to allow myself to die, metaphorically speaking, so that I could be reborn. Because I knew then that I didn't know who I was. I only knew who I had become, and I hated that man. I did not like myself. I realized that I lacked integrity. I lacked empathy and compassion for others, and I just was miserable with myself. And so, in that moment, I knew what that meant, because I knew that if I went home and I stayed doing what I was doing, I would have, like people talk about when they die, the legacy that they want to live, they want to leave. And I was embarrassed, truly embarrassed by who I had become as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as an employer, and as an employee. And I knew that there had to be more to my life than what I had brought forward. At this point, I was 54 years old, and I didn't know what it could look like, because I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to thrive. I spent a lifetime really surviving. Now, from the outside looking in, it looked like I had a pretty good life. It really did. It was the illusion. Smoke and mirrors, as some refer to it.
Yeah. And it's that yes, it can all look fine from the outside. I've experienced that myself. Can all look fine on the outside, but it's the inside that, yes, if you don't, you can be churned up if you don't even know who you are. As you've said, it's a very frightening place to be, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I always felt like I was very fearless. I made a lot of career moves. I made a lot of moves that many people wouldn't have done in their life. And I really thought that I was fearless. It wasn't until I faced death that I understood that, in fact, I had been living a life filled with fear. I just hid it. I just masked it by distracting myself through addictive behaviors. Alcohol and the drugs were not my problem. It never were. But I had other addictions that I would lean into to distract myself from feeling all of my emotions. And I would bury my fear by making decisions and choices that gave me permission to avoid having conscious awareness of the fear that was always prevalent.
It's incredible, isn't it? Those sort of behaviors we can go into. It's almost, I liken it to an asleep versus awake state. And even though we feel like we're awake, we're actually asleep to the fear, and we're asleep to what that's actually doing to ourselves and our lives. So what an incredible turning point for you to come to. So what was the decision? Well, look, clearly the decision you made was to live. What did that look like? How did that play itself out?
Well, I had to be willing to change every aspect of my life. I decided not to stay in my marriage. I decided not to go home. I didn't physically go back home to my wife. We separated, and eventually we divorced. The fears that I had leading into making the decision to leave, and all the other choices that I made moving forward, were a lot of them came true. A lot of the things that I was most fearful of did happen. But what I learned through the process of healing was that each one of those fearful thoughts that became some realities for me were growth opportunities. And through each painful moment that I experienced, it presented an opportunity for me to truly get to see how strong I am, and that I'm not as weak as I thought I was, perhaps, inside. And through that process of healing, what it came down to was that I had to surrender. I had to say, "Uncle, I give up." I had to be willing to acknowledge that the belief system that I had lived my life by, and all the choices that I made was one that I inherited from my ancestors, but one that was no longer serving me because I was not at peace with who I was. And so it was such an amazing process of healing that I refer to as mind, body, and soul. And it started 2 days after I left the hospital. I got real busy real quick on my healing journey immediately.
It's
And it
fantastic.
became, what's it?
I want to hear about that, but I just want to acknowledge you before we go into, because I'd love to hear those steps of the healing journey. I know there's some really significant moments in there because we have spoken about this before. But before we do that, I just wanted to really acknowledge you for the courage, to come. That's a very vulnerable place to be lying in a hospital bed facing death, and then to make that decision to really live for yourself. But the fact that living for yourself would look very, very different and would be a very different lifestyle, even down to not even going back to your own home, which most people in that scenario would, Jay. Most people would have gone back, but you didn't. So there's a real courage and a real lion heart in there that I feel when I speak to you and I hear that story.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that. I'd like to share that about 3 months post that period, I remember it was like yesterday. I know right where I was. I had a conversation at the time with my wife and on the phone, and I let her know that it's over. I'm not coming home. And she shared with me, it was a very healthy, intimate moment for us, which was at that point unusual because we hadn't had that in so long. But I shared with her what I felt, and she shared with me that she was not in agreement with it, and she was willing to do whatever it took to save the marriage. And this was a very defining moment for me as her husband, as a man, as a father, because it was one of the first times I believe that I had the courage to set a boundary with her. And I said to her, I said, I will always love you, and I'll always do my best to respect you moving forward. However, for me, it's no longer about saving a marriage. Today, it's about saving my own life, and I know that I can't do it if we stay together. I need to explore and figure out who I am, not who I want to become. There's a big difference there, you see, because I wasn't interested in reinventing myself, recreating myself. I just wanted to get to know who I was at my core. Some refer to as the heart space or the soul, because I had lost myself. I had lost who I was at my core decades earlier when I was a kid. And ego, my ego space, which ego we know lives in the mind, ego was running my adult life.
Sure.
And I didn't understand all that at that moment, but I understood that it was if we stayed together, it would be very difficult because we had been in and out of therapy and marriage counseling for over 2 decades, 21 years. I had been in therapy, and at that point, you and I talked about this a number of times, Jennifer, that I had been diagnosed back in 1995 with generalized anxiety disorder, and I was put on 2 mental health pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, to manage anxiety. And what I didn't understand then either was 2 things. One was that the anxiety, again, was just a symptom. It really wasn't the root at what my problem was. And being on pharmaceuticals for 21 years destroyed some important parts of my body, my system. It was causing all kinds of havoc unknowingly. And the saddest part is that through all those years of seeing therapists, there were no answers. There was no real true guidance. I just went there. I purged my frustration for the week, time would be up, go home, start the process all over, accumulate new stories. Most of the time I'd go in there, I'd be talking more about my wife than talking about how I was doing, how I was feeling, how I was managing myself. Those conversations weren't happening. And so it was unfortunate. There are some good therapists out there. I just never happened to have the gift of working with one. I didn't have that experience. So
I know, and I hear you and I understand that, and yes, like you, I've been on that journey with anxiety, and it is a symptom of a different issue, of a bigger issue. And you're right, but I guess for whatever reason you had to be on that journey, and it took that time. So, all power to you. And I think that's the other thing you're really demonstrating here is your commitment to yourself and your tenaciousness. Even if you're in that, perhaps what we call that a sleep stage before you had that spiritual awakening, you still had this commitment to yourself. There was still this desire to move forward. And then clearly when this happened, you had the very severe medical situation, and then you made that very clear change. And then 3 months later, as you said, you had to have that very authentic and real, but very intimate conversation that was in some ways sounds like it was a defining moment for you to be so authentic in that moment and so real right then. Do you consider that the turning point or a key part of the process?
not really, because I already had made the decision. The decision really, it came to me from within. It wasn't something that I really thought about. It was just a knowing. It was a knowing, and it was like, it was one of those things that, for me, it wasn't something that was negotiable.
You were clear. You'd made your.
I knew what I needed, and I knew what I was giving up.
Yep.
I was giving something up in order to get something back in return, which was my own freedom within. Perfect. Freedom unlimited.
That's what it's all about. So, yeah, that's exactly it. And it's a big decision. And I think here, one of the things that I talk about a lot is this notion of making that decision point. It's one thing to sort of have a vision of your future or whatever it is that you want, but it's actually the decision point. It's that very clear, as you said, it was an internal knowing, but it's a conscious decision that I'm going to turn right here instead of left, and I'm going to actually live my life in a different way, which you've been sharing so beautifully. So tell us then a bit now about that healing journey and a couple of the key points of that along the way. I know there were some very particular things that you did that have made all the difference. So I'd love to everyone to hear about those.
Well, I mentioned surrender. I mentioned that I went into surrender mode. I went into acknowledging, having the awareness that my light, my guiding light had dimmed years earlier. My guiding light was a belief system that I inherited from my ancestors, as I mentioned earlier. And I was willing to have a ceremony for myself to gift them back to my parents and my great-grandparents and my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. And knowing that it was no longer serving me, not to hold on to anger and resentment and blame for my life, but to learn how to accept that everything that I had experienced was necessary for me to reach this pivotal moment. And part of the surrender was about having courage to change and knowing how to begin to have the courage to express my feelings in many different ways that I had never done before. And I walked into my first 12-step rooms for myself, a program called Al-Anon, to unhook my addiction to my wife. I had to really, let's say, learn how to take care of myself, because I never did. I never knew how. I was so busy focusing on my wife, focusing on my 3 sons, focusing on my staff at the company, focusing on my clients, focusing on everyone but myself. And I never gave myself permission to to know what self-care could look like and feel like. And so it was a beautiful time laid out for me because I was on medical disability and I had the free time. And so I put all of my limited energy into learning what self-care can look like and feel like. And through that process, it took some time, but through the process of showing up consistently every day, practicing, doing something I had never done before. So practicing what self-care can look like and feel like. It included emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. It wasn't me just focusing on one thing. It wasn't me focusing on having to lose any weight. It wasn't me focusing on going to the gym to exercise, to get my cardio up. It was my willingness to try anything and everything differently than I had ever done before. So I didn't go to the gym. I chose not to step into a gym. I didn't want to be in an indoor, enclosed, controlled environment that lacked freedom. I wanted to be out in nature. Now, how did I know that? I was led there. I was led to an incredible beachside community. I fell in love with the ocean, the shoreline. They had this amazing path that I could walk or ride a bike for 25, 30 miles every day if I chose to, and I did most days. I learned how to eat differently. I learned how to exercise differently. I learned for the first time how to pray. I didn't know how in my lifetime. I left my religion when I was about 14 and never looked back. So I had a very self-willed life. I didn't have much faith or trust. Didn't believe. But I found spirituality early on in my healing journey. And I remember at the time, I asked a friend who today is my fiance, I said, how do you pray? Like, what does that look like? Because the only prayer I knew how to do was one that wasn't even spoken in my language. So I didn't even know, it was a prayer that had no meaning to me growing up. And so I got to really explore all aspects of my life and how I was choosing to show up for myself on a daily basis. And through that process of self-care, for me, it was the antidote. I started to feel better emotionally first. And I started to have these little mini breakthroughs on a daily basis, pretty regularly. And over a short amount of time, I started to like how I was feeling emotionally. And I also saw that I was losing weight. Eventually, I lost 60 pounds.
Wow.
I went from like a 42-inch waist down to a 31. Now, of course, I wasn't in it to really lose weight. I was in it to save my life. Now, losing weight was just a bonus. But I was in it to reverse disease. And I had significant conditions that Western medicines to this day still would say to me, you're a very complicated case. And what that means, I'll break that down for someone that may not understand the language that doctors talk, was when they refer to you as a complicated case, it means that they don't know how to treat you. It means that they don't know what to give you or what to do for you. So you're just one more experiment. And I got educated pretty early on in the healing journey, and I made a conscious decision that I wanted out. I wanted to step out of Western medicine, and I started to get educated. I started to study. So I was doing self-care in the mornings, and I started to embrace self-improvement in the afternoons. I'd study. I'd go online and I'd seek. I was a truth seeker. I was a seeker to learn how to heal. And because it was just this inner knowing that I kept saying, is it possible? Is it possible that I could reverse disease? Is it possible that I can heal? Now, we're not talking about healing from like an acute flu or a virus or a cold. I'm talking about chronic diseases that should have and could have taken me out and should have. And so through that process between self-care and self-improvement, I started have some major breakthroughs in my life. And eventually I started to like myself. And through that process, it became the gateway for me falling in love with myself.
How fantastic, Jay. And look, and what I love about what you've just described there is that it didn't happen overnight. Obviously it happened over a relatively quick period of time compared to the time span leading up to it. But there was something different you did here in this sort of healing journey that was different from after the heart attack. And it was understanding that you needed to get to know yourself and to become this level of comfort to yourself. It was surrendering to the way you thought life should be, or the way you'd been brought up for life to be. And this notion of, I'm going to be here, I'm just going to get to know myself right now. And I'm going to take it. It sounds like it was just baby steps, and each little step allowed you to feel a bit better. So success breeds success, as they say, so that you could then start going on to the next bigger breakthroughs. So how powerful is that? It didn't have to happen overnight. It could just be this evolution, if you like.
It was just, yeah. And it was a knowing. It's just like I had spent a lifetime. Look, I was a pill junkie. I wasn't addicted to drugs, but I was a pill junkie. I was always sick. I always got the shots. I got the vaccines, but it didn't stop me from getting sick. I had chronic sinusitis. I always had bronchitis. I had colds. I traveled a lot for business, internationally and across the United States. But I was always sick. But I also was on what's referred to as the SAD diet, standard American diet. I was a food junkie. I was addicted to fast food. That was the business I was in. I was in restaurant design my whole career. And I got hooked on that food. I got hooked on the boxed food, the processed food, the fast food. And I would eat, twice a day, Monday through Friday. When I was traveling, I was eating that food, breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. Wow. And, so I was causing massive damage to my body on the inside. I smoked, I worked, I was a workaholic. So that was one of my addictions. I had a food addiction. I had the work addiction. I was, a minimum day was 10 to 12 hours, and a really good day I was 15. And if I was really pushing it and really flying high, I was going to pump out 18 hours in a day. And I would reward myself for that, with another lousy comfort food meal, another cigarette. And through it all, what was behind it, what was the root addiction for me was the codependency. Right. And that was really the root disease. And so part of my healing journey it wasn't just the physical part of walking and getting in nature and learning how to connect with myself and learning how to connect with the dolphins and the seals and sometimes the sea otter and the birds. Just incredible moments of just connection at the shoreline. But I also had to learn to connect with myself and understand what I was feeling and to be able to communicate those feelings. And really what saved my life too was going to these Al-Anon meetings. I learned how to have the courage to raise my hand and to share every aspect of my story, even parts of my story that they really didn't welcome there. They didn't want me to talk about because it wasn't related to Al-Anon, but it was another addiction that I had. But in that experience I would go to Al-Anon meetings twice a day consistently. And when I needed a third meeting, I do a third meeting. So I bookended my days. I had an early morning meeting, I had an evening meeting, and if I was really hurting, I'd go to a noon meeting. And I did that for a year and a half, consistently every day. But through that process, I learned how to cry as a man. And it was just, it was so healing.
Yeah. Wow, Jay. Take a breath on that. That's a big breath there. That's all about stepping into your vulnerability and into your really deeply who you were in front of a group of people. That's and again, another very courageous action that you took, guided, I'm sure, by your inner knowing. But wow, I didn't know that. I hadn't heard that before. So, and that's that real commitment to yourself that's coming through as well. But the power there is in, I think what you're saying to me there is the vulnerability, sharing what was truly on your heart and in what was true for you was actually a very healing thing, and to get to know yourself through that process.
Yeah, no doubt. And what was beautiful about it was that as a married man, I had spent so much of my time blaming now my ex-wife for my woes,
Mm.
always seeing the things in her that frustrated me, the things that I didn't like in her, and really putting the blame on her for my unhappiness.
Yeah.
And through the healing process, what really helped me was when I embraced this idea that came to me. It didn't come from the 12-step rooms, but I refer to it as the 4 A's. And they are awareness, acceptance. The third one, which was very powerful for me, which was accountability. And then the fourth A was action. And for me, what accountability meant was that for the first time in my life, I was willing to show up and grow up. That I was no longer willing to blame my wife. I was no longer willing to live in the shackles of blaming my mom and dad, which I had done for decades. And it was time for me to hold myself accountable and say, acknowledge, yeah, I did those things.
Mm.
I said those things, I did those things, and I held on to all of it for years. And I chose to hold myself accountable now. Let's keep in mind that doesn't mean that I went into shame and guilt. That's not what accountability for me meant, was that I could acknowledge, yes, I said those things, I did those things. I made a lot of missteps in my life.
Yeah.
However, accountability, a healthy accountability, is about acknowledging I did those things, but I did them because I didn't know how wounded I was. I didn't know that I had a whole lifetime of what I refer to as inner shadows, unhealed wounds, unhealed moments, pivotal moments, traumas, experiences that had defined my life as an adult. And all I was doing was carrying them with me internally, living an unconscious life, sleepwalking, yet never holding myself accountable for my choices that would bring me short-term, quick-hit comfort, but were very damaging to myself and my loved ones.
That's it.
And so accountability really was a keynote gateway for more significant healing.
Absolutely. And I would agree with you. And I think on my journey, it was exactly the same thing. It was when we look at and go, because it's easy to throw the blame out elsewhere, as you said, to your wife, to your kids, to the job, to the parents, whatever, to all the external situations. But when we finally realize that actually, as much as we think we're a victim, we're actually a perpetrator on other people, and to own that fully. And you're right, not to self-flagellate, not to go, oh my God, and to go into a whole lot of judgment after that, but actually just to own it, be clean with it, be clear with it, be accountable to it, and then be aware that that's not the way you want to live moving forward. And that sounds like it was a very significant jumping off point for you then to the next level of your healing.
It was. What that led to was the last A, which is action. And action for me was really, it came down to just learning how to show up consistently every day, learning how to set healthy boundaries for myself, learning how to say no thank you to somebody else, because when I say no thank you, I'm actually saying thank you to myself. I'm learning how to take care of myself. And what that process did was it allowed me to learn how, when I say take care of myself, with that, I'll break it down for you in a language I know you understand, which is it allowed me to learn how to parent myself. Because all along, I'm now a 54-year-old man, and here I was just starting to understand that little boy inside that I referred to as JJ was still alive. He still was a little boy that was still scared, frightened, still had temper tantrums and meltdowns, still was get hungry, lonely, angry, tired, and bored, and was his whole life just looking for someone to love him, someone to take care of him. And I spent a lifetime seeking that.
Looking for yourself. Yeah.
And wanting someone else to make me feel better. I remember, I think I was married for about 10 years, and it was one of the times that I had the courage to really have an intimate conversation with my wife. And I remember I said to her, I think it's about 10 years in, I said, I'm not happy. I know we're together, but I'm not happy. I feel I've got this inner feeling. I feel empty inside. I refer to it today as the black hole of the soul. And no matter what I would put in it, no matter how much success in life I had, the hole was always there. It was still empty. And I remember saying to her, I don't understand why you can't make me feel better, why you can't make me happy. And in that moment, it was perhaps the most profound statement she had ever shared with me. And she said to me, well, what is it that you need from me? And I looked at her and I said, I don't know. I don't know. And she said to me, here we go. Here's a setup. She says to me, well, if you don't know what you need from me, how do you expect me to know? I can't read your mind. And here was my only answer I had for her, because this was my truth in the moment, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I said to her, how could you not know? You're my wife. You say you love me. How could you not know what I need? And there, right in that moment, we were at a significant crossroad, because nothing changed. I just got sicker. The marriage got sicker with me. And eventually, I shut down, she shut down, we weren't communicating. There was a lot of hurt and pain in the home. And
It's
okay. What I learned through this process is I love feeling today.
Yeah.
I wrote a blog when I started blogging. At some point during my healing journey, I wrote a blog, Real Men Do Cry. And I started to give myself permission to do just that, to cry. And initially the tears were tears of pain and sorrow and regret, some resentment, some feelings of injustice. But I got to work through all of that. And through the process, what I learned was that I had never been given permission to cry. It's not how I was raised in my home. And, for the first time in my life, I gave myself permission that it was okay. And I learned how the tears eventually, today, most of my tears are tears of gratitude for how far I have come and for how far my relationships have come.
That's right. And how to fully experience yourself. I think, it's look, this is it's a very tough conditioned model for men in terms of, well, men don't cry and so on and so forth. But with cutting that off, you're cutting off an essential part of yourself, and you're not able to experience yourself fully. So the power of this is that you took action and you're able to talk and really, truly experience, but be okay with that dimension of yourself that you'd probably hidden away for many, many years, that little part of JJ that really did want to express and did really want to be seen and acknowledged, and be okay for feeling like crying. Because we're human, we've been given this wide gamut of emotions to experience, haven't we? It's not like we've said you can only use emotion A to P, you can't use from P to Z. So it's about how can we experience all of that. So what a powerful journey, Jay, for you to go on, to just come to that space of allowing yourself and allowing and accepting. And this is, again, a very core principle to the work that I do, is this really deep level understanding of allowing and accepting ourselves to be exactly who we are in every moment, and others as well. So powerful. So what happened next?
Well, through the process of healing, and the healing was the emotional, the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. I didn't just focus on one area. I knew that if I wanted to have balance in my life, I had to focus on healing all of those aspects. I refer to them as the 4 pillars. And so it was a daily reprieve is what I got. And each day I showed up no matter how I felt. And I got tagged after having multiple surgeries in less than a week. I had an allergic reaction to anesthesia, which of course the doctors say doesn't happen, but it happened. My doctors said, "Oh, I never heard of that before." And I'm like, "Oh, it happened." I ended up with chronic fatigue and brain fog for 17 months. And so my ability to work 12, 15-hour days was gone. I couldn't do it. Even after I had recovered, so-called recovery from surgeries, I didn't have the stamina, I didn't have the endurance to do that. And I had to learn how to accept that I couldn't show up the way I used to, which ended up being the greatest gift because it taught me that I knew at some point, I think it was about the 12th month into it, that I said, I think God's got just a funny sense of humor, because I think what he's doing is he's teaching me that I could live and I could live without working 12, 15-hour days. And he's probably not going to give me my energy back or my brain function back until I have experienced what life can be like, not working like an animal and learning how to take care of myself. And, it wasn't until I hit the 17th month where I was blessed with my energy back. A brain fog still lingered. Not as bad, but it lingered. And then eventually I got it back a second time pretty bad. I needed to have another procedure done. And I told them I didn't want to have go under. Could they give me something just to, not anesthesia, because I didn't want to have the same reaction. And they said yes, but so they gave me a local. But what I didn't know at the time was they gave me the same anesthesia drug as a local that they had given me as a general. So I ended up with the brain fog and the chronic fatigue all over again. But this time, the second time around, I was able to work through it a lot quicker. I jumped into, first time in my life, really heavy load into acupuncture. I was going, I think 3 or 4 times a week. I found an authentic acupuncturist, from overseas, and just he didn't just do acupuncture, he did cupping, he did all the other modalities that can accompany acupuncture. And that really helped me. And then the second thing I did was I eventually went into a major water fast. I did just shy of 3 weeks. I was just starting on my 20th day of being on a water fast. I had juiced 3 times, 8 ounces of juice. But other than that, I was no food for 19 full days. And I did some major brain repair during that, as well as some other repairs. But, when it was all said and done, the end result was I did so much healing of my body, of my mind, of my soul. I faced my shadows from my childhood. And, I smile as I say these words because so many people are fearful of it. That's why they're afraid. They're afraid to do the work because they're afraid of how they're going to feel. They're afraid of what's going to come forward. But I could tell you that the greatest gift I gave myself was facing the shadows. By facing the shadows, I got to heal my body. I got to reverse diseases. I got to experience what healthy intimacy can be like with men and women all around the globe today. And I got to learn how to show up and grow up. I got to learn how to take care of myself, how to listen to my needs, how to express them. Eventually, I became a blogger. Last week, I released my second #1 international bestseller in Amazon bookstores as a co-author in a book. I launched, eventually, I wanted to launch shows like what you're doing here. And my first show is a show called Real Men, Real Talk Raw. And then I launched the show for people that stepped out of traditional Western medicine and have self-healed from chronic diseases, terminal diseases like cancer and autoimmune diseases and mental health. And then I launched another show for people that have survived abuse to come forward and share their stories. So 3 very powerful platforms, being able to give, to pay it forward and provide inspiration and hope for those that may be still suffering in pain, emotional and physical pain, and hear stories of inspiration to provide them courage to possibly step into their own life, to take it back and experience what freedom can truly feel like. Now, we're not talking about physical freedom here. We're talking about emotional freedom, freedom within, freedom to experience what inner peace can feel like.
And that's exactly right. It's that core freedom within ourselves, Jay. I mean, it's what happens inside our minds and the perspective that we have on our whole life. Our external life doesn't necessarily need to change for us to feel an incredible level of freedom and an incredible level of just different perspective and love for ourselves. So I agree with you. And as you said, you've done the hard yards and now you're able to pay it forward with these incredible shows. One of the things that I wanted to just touch on before we close, because it's such a powerful part of your story, was when you were with the very eminent, he wanted to do a procedure on you, a bypass procedure on you, and you chose not to. And I just would like to, if we could quickly just recap on that a little, because I think
Sure.
to me, this is like a beautiful snapshot of how you harnessed everything within your toolbox to actually create such significant healing.
Okay. Yeah. I had a feeling you were going to bring me back there, because it is a huge part. It's not a huge part of my story. It's a huge part of our story. And the story I'm talking about is our ability to heal. Our bodies have been engineered and built to heal. And what's happened in society, not just an American society, but progressive societies around the world, is through media, through government, and through medicine. They have created a society of people that believe they are weak. We're not taught in homes, doctors are not taught in medical school that our body has a full capacity to heal, even from stage 4 metastasized cancer. I have met so many men and women through my show, Real People, Real Health, that have in fact not only defied their odds as I have done, but they've survived cancer, given 6 months to live, and today they are cancer-free. That's called NED, no evidence of disease. How does that happen? Well, how that happens is that to begin a healing journey, we have to change our mindset. We have to rewire our brains. And when we do the healing on our thoughts, on our experiences, and how we talk to ourselves, our body will respond. So our body is responding every day. If we're talking negatively about ourselves, to ourselves,
it's feeling it. Yep.
It's that disease creates disease.
Mm.
And so we also have the flip side of that. The contrast is that if we change the story, we change our life. We can heal. That's a term called radical remissions is real.
Mm.
It happens.
Tell us your story. What happened? What happened with you?
So what happened was I had just come off of a vacation. I had been to Arizona really for the first time for fun and pleasure. It was July of 18, and it's the heat of the summer. And yes, we did 15 hikes. And while I was hiking, I had pain in my right leg, which is not unusual because one of the surgeries I had was my right leg had been my main artery, my iliac artery was 99% blocked back in 15, so they had to do a bypass to my leg. And my other leg was 90% blocked, so they could save that artery, and they did a stent. And what happened was when I came back from Arizona, a week later, I was back at the hospital for my semi-annual testing. And the doctors, the radiologists found that my bypass to my leg was 100% occluded. That means it was 100% blocked.
It was not working.
And so now this bypass that they had done, they bypassed my first major artery, which was the iliac. So now they went in through my, what's called the femoral artery. Now that artery is now blocked. So now I have no major artery. I have no artery to fuel blood from my hip down to my lower extremities, known as my toes. However, they did what's called an ABI blood pressure test at my ankle, and they found that I had a blood pressure of 70%. And the doctors were like, well, this makes no sense. You should be at 0. Matter of fact, you should be in a wheelchair. And it makes no sense that you just came off of 15 major hikes in the extreme heat. It's impossible. Something is going on. We need to keep you here today and do some testing and figure out how it's possible. And I tell you what, I remember I had the test done, and then Mary and I walked down the main street in Beverly Hills and went and grabbed a bite to eat because the doctor couldn't see me till later in the afternoon, and plus I had to wait for the test results. And I was so angry. I was frustrated. I was angry. I was like beside myself. I'm like, this makes no sense. I did everything that I was supposed to do right. I was the perfect patient, A+, right? And I should have gotten up to 10 years out of this bypass, and I hadn't even gotten 2 years.
What's going on?
And it took a couple of hours until we got the answers, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe what had happened. And what had happened was 8 months earlier, I was introduced to a film called Heal Documentary. Kelly Gores, who today is a friend of mine, was a filmmaker, and in that movie, she had some brilliant scientists that were part of the Heal documentary. And one of them was Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he taught me how to basically create a visual, a new blood flow in my body, because he had self-healed from 6 broken vertebrae from a bicycle accident when he was in his 20s. And he did it without surgery. He was in a wheelchair. And I figured if he could do that with his spine, then I can create my own blood flow. I could create new vessels, new veins to fuel blood through my body. And so what they found was they had identified 2 brand new vessels that were not there 8 months earlier. And it was a week, 8 months earlier was about the same week or so that I saw heal. So at that time, I didn't have those blood. They identified 2 new blood vessels for my leg and also 2 of my heart. And in that moment, I understood exactly what had happened. I had bypassed the bypass. And I believe that when the divine understood that I had done just that, he took my bypass out of service. He said, you don't need it anymore. I'm going to shut it down. And it was in that moment that my doctor, who was the top doctor at Cedars, he was the director of vascular surgery. He's like, well, we have to go in and put a new bypass in. And I'm like, well, why? And he said,
based on this evidence, why would you? Yeah.
He said, we don't have another choice. He said, you need another bypass. You don't have blood flow going through any major artery. And I said, but you got me at 70% through my own vessels that I've built, I've created. He said, that's true. And I said, well, is it possible if I did all that, just doing what I was doing, all this at the beach at the time in Huntington Beach, California, is it possible that if I moved to the mountains of Arizona, instead of sitting on my beach cruiser riding my bike every day, what if I was hiking, doing some extreme hikes daily, 7 days a week, 365? Is it possible that I could build more blood vessels, more blood flow, and I could get that pressure up to 80%? He said, possible. I said, is it possible that I could get it to 90%? He said, yeah, maybe. He says, oh, but I don't recommend that. He says, I said, what other choice do I have? He says, you don't. It's surgery. And I said, Doc, with all due respect, I think I do have another choice. He said, what's that? I said, I could move to the mountains and hike and keep building more blood flow. I said, you know what? I'll get back to you. I'll think about this one. I hung up the phone with my doctor, Dr. Gerwitz, and I called Mary and I said, Mary, how long do you think it'll take us to pack and U-Haul it across the border? And she said, oh, about 3 weeks, across the state line, I should say. And 3 weeks later, we were here.
Mm.
And I never looked back. I never called the doctor back. I eventually got off all my pharmaceuticals. I'm drug-free today. I'm off of all my drugs. I've self-healed, 9 diagnoses. And today I live a life of freedom, true freedom, free thinking, not self-will, but I have free will today. I unplugged from the TV. Today I'm a transformational coach. I hold other people's hands that are sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, living in disease, living in pain, living in addictions, living in a chronic terminal disease. And I share my blueprint with them. I show them how I did it. I
I love it.
mentor them and give them the courage that it's possible, that they could have a life beyond their wildest dreams.
And Jay, you're living proof of that. You have completely reinvented yourself at every level. And as you say, you've stepped into true freedom for yourself. So it's just, what a fantastic story. Thank you so much for sharing all of you with us today. Before we close, and this is one thing we'll always be doing on Freedom Unlimited, is I'd just like to ask you if there's one piece of advice, one thing that anyone who's listening today, I mean, we've heard this is a 5-year journey, and for people listening, I just would love to encourage you to just know that it just takes one step. We've heard of, in a short time, a very long journey. But if there was one thing, Jay, that you would suggest for people to perhaps consider on their journey, what would that thing be? One piece of advice, something that has worked really well for you?
Have the courage and face whatever fears you have, because no matter what you're facing, you have a choice. You have a choice to either live in pain or feel the pain.
Mm.
When you feel the pain, you heal. I lived in pain for 54 years of my life. And my quality of life was horrible at the end. And my relationships were wounded. And I was near death.
Mm.
And so that's a choice, to live in pain or feel the pain. And when you feel the pain, it's the gateway to freedom. And it's possible to experience breaking a chain and removing the shackles in which you are living your life today. Have the courage to start. And when you go through that beautiful process of coming home to yourself, there is where true freedom is when you come home to yourself, who you were born to be, which is free.
Absolutely. Free and completely unlimited. And I know that's how you live your life now, Jay, and it's just absolutely all power to you. I do know that when you walk still, you still have pain, but you are living in a completely different paradigm, one of your choice, and it's a life that is just expanding exponentially very, very quickly. So, thank you very much for your time today. Where should people go if they'd like to find out more about you? Where would you like them to go to visit and find out more about you?
Well, most of my information is through Facebook. You could go to, my name is Jay Rothman, or Jay Rothman Life. I also, if you want to follow one of my shows that we're hoping to bring to network TV in 2020, Real Men, Real Talk Live.
Fantastic.
That's on Facebook. You could find us there. You could also find me on Instagram under Real Men, Real Talk Live, or Jay Rothman Life.
We'll put all of that in the show notes as well to today. So, Jay, I just want to say again, thank you so much for your time, for your sharing, for your heart, and for the courage that you have shared with us today, and the sharing with us this whole journey that you've been on. And it really is. When I talk about Freedom Unlimited, this is exactly what I'm talking about, which is why I wanted Jay to be on the show, because he's living that life. And it's about finding this freedom within yourself. It's not about something that anyone else can do, but it's something that you can do for yourself. And it can be just a step-by-step journey. It's just about making a little start today, and allowing each day to build upon itself. I think that consistency and showing up for yourself, Jay, that's the other thing you've done consistently, is to show up. So I just want to thank you so much for your time and your heart and your courage. So thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. And I look forward to being able to not only give you a virtual hug, but hopefully in 2020 or 2021, come visit you in Australia. Hopefully, maybe we'll be on a road. Maybe we'll be touring, showing men especially how it's possible to have freedom.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have open arms for you here, Jay. Looking forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Take
Take
care.
care.